Hello everyone, I'm Benjamin Hart. You probably know me from our main channel, Integrity Legal Thailand. I've been doing various content on this particular channel for a little bit of a while now, but it's been kind of long form and frankly a little bit scatterbrained. I am using the opportunity of Election Day here in Thailand, February 8th, 2026, as sort of the moment, if you will, of bifurcation between sort of what I would call the news function and, hard to say, the more social side of social media, and a sort of rededication to the main channel focusing on legal topics, U.S., Thai immigration, legal topics involving expats and things. There will be some more news and topical stuff over there. I expect I'll probably keep some of the foreigners behaving badly stuff going over there. That seems to be kind of a fan, not exactly favorite, but it does act as a sort of barometer of what's going on in sort of expat land out here, I do believe. And so for that purpose, I think that's wise to keep that there. But it's time for me to branch out a little bit. I really have debated just calling the whole channel Checkpoint Benji, but I'm going to make this a show. And this is just going to be me. I've already made content where I'm talking about the house we got up at the border, which border may or may not open depending on the outcome of many things and how the negotiations go and things like that up there. So that remains to be seen. But I wanted to go ahead and get this going. Also, bwh.club is going to be where I move all of our very, very loyal and very, very thanked members from our paid news service from last year, 2025. Over in bwh.club, we're going to do more of that kind of content. But my more, what I would call, there's some highly premium content that I can make that's very in-depth about things that are specifically going on, especially in Southeast Asia, upcoming trends, especially regarding visas, work permits, banking. All of that stuff's going to go through bwh.club. There's also services, which on the one hand, I've thought about calling it concierge sort of member services, but it's where sort of, it's a gray area between really law firm services, which there's high fees associated with that because it takes a great deal of time and energy and just solving really intractable problems. You got to get paid for that because it just takes the time and resources it takes. Meanwhile, the situation involving, things that are more, I think with metals going the way they are, the way cannabis is moving, there's going to be a niche. I hesitate to call it attorney services, but purchasing services for folks, also storage services, and just general expat services. Sometimes they'll need to be referred back off to the law firm. Sometimes we can handle it within the club. Again, it's a community on one level, but it's a community to try and help folks who are really in the expat world and trying to maintain some modicum of privacy in this crazy world in which we live in. So that's what bwh.club is going to be about. I will get to more of that, and I'm going to be putting out a private video on that. I just got the final specs on the website. As soon as I'm done getting acclimated with it, we'll bring it online, and I'll bring it to the paid news subscribers first, and then we'll get it sort of more broadly out. But it's coming. I should have it very shortly. And sorry it's taken so long, but there's only one me, and I've only got so many people around here, and they're all great. But that's why it's taken a little longer than I thought. I thought I'd be able to just seamlessly transition to that in the first of the year, and that turned out not to be the case. In any event, let's talk about what we're going to get to here. So first of all, we're going to go ahead and throw this on screen. This is from Dr. Chris Martenson. Chris Martenson is somebody over at Peak Prosperity I've really come to know and respect and admire, even from a distance. We've interacted a little bit on Twitter, but yeah, he brought up a couple of key points. I'm starting to think Epstein is not necessarily exclusively, it's obviously about the heinous crimes perpetrated against children, which that's its own thing. That's not what I'm getting to here. Somebody a long time ago told me that Epstein was much more connected, more integrally, and Whitney Webb actually talks about this a lot, that he was very much a nexus point between a lot of different things. And one thing that we're starting to see is this pandemic profiteering seems to have been a brainchild of Bill Gates and Epstein. And we'll put this up on screen. This is from Chris Martinson's Twitter. And he says, kind of crazy how many victims were emailing Epstein about pandemic profiteering. And then going over here to another tweet from old Chris, the Epstein files reveal that the Event 201/COVID pandemic response was all planned, looped through JP Morgan and designed to turn quote-unquote pandemics into multi-trillion-dollar profit centers. Let's face it, we don't have a bad human problem, we have a demon problem. And yeah, it kind of seems like we do there, Chris. I guess I like to use Chris's tweets as a jumping off point real quick here. Exactly what I'm trying to do maybe with this channel moving forward. You know, I'm not looking to be, I don't love the social or the media side so much of social media. I ended up on YouTube, I kind of backed into it, and I just want to put out thoughtful, truthful information. And I would like to kind of wake up people more and more to the fact that getting, you know, even aside from, you know, demonic is really sort of the only word for some of these allegations in these Epstein files, especially when you get into some of the deeper stuff associated with physical abuse and why they're doing it, and in order to harvest, and under what, that's probably the right word, in order to harvest what exactly, and I don't want to dive into that directly in this video. But more to the point is, there was also a nexus point with all this supranationalist tyranny, and that's why I titled this sort of the Tempest of Tyranny, because that's the only thing I can describe it with. Meanwhile, he had counterpoints over here to the World Economic Forum. This is coming out of Reuters. World Economic Forum investigates its CEO over Epstein links. And let's be clear, I want to be clear from the outset, I don't want to cast aspersions at this WEF CEO that aren't meritorious. So if this person just has a tangential connection to Epstein, and a lot of folks do, that are in high places, so be it. You know, but if he was, you know, engaged in some of in this really nefarious stuff, then if so, he needs to be allowed due process and then punished accordingly. But more to the point is the fact that birds of a feather flock together. And Epstein seemed not only hell-bent on destroying the innocence of children, but also on creating some sort of global control grid, as well as a pandemic profit center grid. And of all people over on Alt Market, Brandon Smith over at Alt Market has brought this up many, many times. I'll try to throw a link in the description below to Alt Market along with these other links, where he talks about the intention behind all of this was to create this roving, sort of this recurring pandemic notion in the public narrative, in the public mind, in order to use it as a profit center. And if you go back when they were talking about the Great Reset, you'll own nothing and be happy, in 2020, 2021, and into 2022, when the WEF was, in my opinion, at their peak. I think they've actually plateaued and declined at this point. We're actually seeing sort of the denouement of the WEF. You know, I thought it was very telling. Lutnick went there and in his own bombastic way said that, you know, we're done with this global world order, rules-based stuff. Carney, in a different way, signaled, the Prime Minister of Canada, who I often call the gimp of the New World Order because they like pull him out whenever they can't find anyone else in the Anglosphere that's the non-American part of the Anglosphere. It's like Carney just pops up either at the Bank of England or as Prime Minister of Canada, apropos of nothing. You know, he just sort of came in and sideswiped Poilievre up there, and next thing you know, he's just the PM. And it's like, why? But okay, you know, Canada's electoral politics are her own. But going back to this, quoting directly from Reuters, the World Economic Forum has launched an independent investigation into its CEO, Borg Brendi. I don't know if I'm spelling that right. Although the CEO of the World Economic Forum being named Borg, like the Borg in Star Trek, that seems kind of weirdly fitting. That said, to clarify his relationship with sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, the organization said on Thursday. My first question is, why is he investigating him? Why is the WEF doing it? And by the way, what authority does the WEF have at all? They're not, you know, and this is the other one. They're not like a professional organization like a bar association would be for attorneys in a given state, or a medical association would be for for doctors in certain states, or board certification, the certification committee. You know, the WEF is a private entity. So them saying, oh, we're going to investigate him ourselves, that would be like, it's not too far off, in my opinion, to say that's like Cosa Nostra saying we're going to investigate one of our own guys for wrongdoing. You know, and really, it's a private organization that might not necessarily, in my opinion, telling us they want us all to own nothing and be happy means that they don't have the best interest of the general public at heart. You know, to have them investigating this guy, it seems a little, you know, less than appropriate. That said, quote, in light of these interactions, the governing board requested the Audit and Risk Committee to look into the matter, which subsequently decided to initiate an independent review, the WEF said in a statement. Again, if this guy didn't do anything illegal with Epstein, fair enough. He's just in the files as having contacted him. And I do understand that there are innocent people otherwise of Epstein's misconduct that are mentioned in this stuff. So again, I don't want to cast aspersions unduly, but it does feel like that maybe it's a less than ardent response to have the WEF go ahead and investigate this guy rather than, I don't know, how about the police look into any of this stuff? Again, if the guy didn't do anything, the guy didn't do anything. And I don't want to cast aspersions on somebody that didn't. But again, the fact that there is a nexus point between this notion of pandemic profiteering, you know, the World Economic Forum, which pushed all this stuff heavily during COVID. I know because I was on the other end of it doing videos out here in the darkness in Thailand on a channel that's not monetized and barely got any traction, but people did eventually notice it. You know, I'm here to tell you, makes me uneasy that there's a commonality on the Venn diagram between the WEF, Epstein, and then also you've got the World Health Organization, which Martinson brings up. And that brings up a couple of other things as it pertains specifically to Thailand, most notably these, again, so reading from Chris Martinson's tweet, please find attached agenda for the meeting on preparing for pandemics as requested. Let's discuss next steps. For example, how to officially involve the WHO and ICRC, i.e. co-branding. Best regards, and I hope we can pull this off. And this is apparently, this is to Jeffrey Epstein, and it pertains to the WHO. The sender is left out, at least in this meme that Chris has up. But I find it interesting that Epstein then has a common vector, if you will, with the WHO, and then that brings to the forefront this recent announcement. This is from BBC.com over 23rd January 2026. Under the title, U.S. officially leaves World Health Organization, quoting directly, the U.S. is officially withdrawn from the World Health Organization, WHO, leaving the UN agency without one of its biggest donors. U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order signaling the withdrawal a year ago, having criticized the organization for being too, quote-unquote, China-centric, unquote, during the COVID pandemic. Quoting further, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services said it took the decision due to the WHO's alleged, quote-unquote, mishandling of the pandemic and inability to reform and political influence from member states and member people. Remember, you've got Bill Gates who just donates tons of money into it, and there was talk very, very beginning. I think Bill Gates got an award, or Bill Gates gave an award to Xi Jinping regarding in the opening stages of the quote-unquote pandemic. And again, when you read this in context of Jeffrey Epstein talking about pulling off, you know, getting the WHO involved in preparing for pandemics, and again, this is back in 2015, you know, and then you get into things like you research Event 201, and I urge those who are watching this video, go look up Event 201, and you look at the fact that they were creating the notion of pandemics as profit centers. You know, major players, if you will, that engaged in these, I don't know what you call it, in these, Event 201 would be considered something akin to it'd be like a role-playing game. They game out how this thing would operate. Oh, by the way, it just happened to operate exactly how it played out in reality after they had planned it. So they planned it, they did like a mini sort of troubleshooting game of it, and then it came out. That's basically what went down here. And then if you look that Epstein was involved with this stuff, you know, it gets creepy. And then Epstein's got connections to the WEF. Again, at what point do you have to ask, do any of these people have anyone in the public's best interest at heart other than to create a narrative that can create profit centers? And again, thanks to Mr. Trump. I don't agree with everything he does, but pulling out of the WHO is a pretty good thing. Meanwhile, over here in Thailand, quoting from Bangkok Post, bangkokpost.com, article is titled, Ministry Steps Up Nipah Virus Vigilance. Quoting directly, the Ministry of Public Health has intensified preventative and surveillance measures against the Nipah virus, even as authorities stress that the risk of infection in the country remains very low. The heightened vigilance follows recent reports of Nipah cases in India, eastern state of West Bengal, prompting health authorities to strengthen monitoring across healthcare and transport sectors. In response, the ministry has instructed all relevant agencies to enhance disease surveillance, review clinical treatment protocols, and ensure sufficient stocks of medical supplies and protective equipment. Look, I'm all in favor of Thailand's public health ministry and various mechanisms doing what they can to maintain public health here. Don't get me wrong. But it's clear to me at this point that at the very least, the WHO overplayed what COVID was. And frankly, I think that they shoehorned this disease, whatever you want to call it, this virus, into the legal definition of pandemic in order then to kick off all of these various treaties and international protocols that resulted in, at least here in Thailand, a full lockdown. Country was completely shut down, basically economically moribund for 2 hard years. And people forget all the folks that died, especially in the first month or two when everything got shut down, because folks that lived hand to mouth, you know, street vendors, etc. I remember there were multiple stories of people taking their own lives during all of that. It was horrible. And we now look back on it and find out that, oh, hey, literally everything they told us about the so-called vaccine, which that's really the wrong definition because they changed the definition of vaccine in order to make that happen, to make that narrative happen. We now know that a lot of what they said was a lie. And now we see this, I think actually more than the, again, salacious stuff surrounding Epstein. I think the reason for the dragging of the feet and the delaying of even bringing out what looks to me like a very still redacted version of these files is the fact that it ties him, a very nefarious character, to all of these organizations and shows that they were doing things that very much were at odds with, or at least counter to, what was being later portrayed in the public narrative. So this is, again, the problem. Now, again, I hope Trump's pulling out of the World Health Organization operates similarly to his rejection of the OECD, insofar as it allows people to see that, hey, maybe these things aren't great for us at a national level. And, you know, I think you have to start asking that with respect to this. But that said, I'm going to wrap this first episode of Checkpoint Benji up here real quick. That's, again, I'm moving a lot of this kind of op-ed kind of content over here to this channel. But, you know, for Epstein to literally be in the center of a Venn diagram between the WHO, the WEF, the very people who push this notion of a pandemic, and then to see him again, and I urge you to go check out the links and go down the rabbit hole with old Chris Martenson because he does a good job. He's a pathologist. His background is in this stuff, and he examines it very thoroughly and, in my opinion, very objectively, especially when called for. But then once, you know, it's concluded that, hey, a lot of this is bunk, I really like how he kind of, from time to time, humorously also deals with it. So Chris Martenson's one of the good ones, I would say. That said, again, to see Epstein at the center, at the epicenter, if you will, of this Venn diagram is truly troubling. And we're going to keep reporting on some of this stuff, mostly because now, to my mind, I call into question the legitimacy of anything coming from the WEF at all times. Now, more and more, anything coming from the WHO. And let me also be clear, that doesn't mean I completely disregard or dismiss out of hand things that happen otherwise within the UN. I'm not a complete person that's just like, oh, there's no place for the UN. I think it has a place. I don't think it's exact. My thinking on it is probably a little different than what the UN itself thinks of itself. But I do think there's a purpose to the UN, and it was legitimately created by treaty, whereas the WEF is just a bunch of people, bunch of rich people who seem to have connections to people with some very strange proclivities, talking about how they want us all eating bugs and owning nothing and being happy, for them to then have, a connection to Epstein and then all this WHO stuff and pandemic profiteering. It is all very creepy, and I think we have hit a watershed moment where we can now look at this stuff in a very different way than we had to in the past. Reporting on this is now very much reporting on news. I'm sick and tired of everybody talking about this like it's being poo-pooed and dismissed out of hand. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist or something. No, there's white papers and stuff on this. We've seen the emails connecting this stuff to Epstein. We've seen that he has connections to all sorts of weird stuff, including cryptocurrency and the sort of push to get all of us onto financial transactions that everybody can track and trace in real time. Again, all of this, to my mind, shows us that there is a tempest of tyranny out there globally that's really trying to attack the nation states of the world and basically trying to get us all to eat bugs, own nothing and be happy, be on perpetual lockdown, pay to get ourselves out of it by paying for their various treatments and remedies so that we can then be free again. This is not a world I want to live in. It's not a business model that's based on good intentions and goodwill. And I'm hopeful we can push back on some of that here at Checkpoint Benji. Also, we'll be having some humorous content as well, and just stuff that pertains to things like border runs and border running in Thailand. It'll be kind of a mixed bag, but I'm looking forward to doing it with you folks, and thanks for tuning in on this first episode.